Get your fixes with Brian Cloonan. Call 0818 300 183 and put our toolman to the test.
Martin says, Will, I can picture Cloonan calling you a goat. The greatest of all time, absolutely.
Well, actually, to be honest with you, you were talking a couple of minutes ago about, which is the bane of every shopkeeper's life is the dog crap on the footpath. And it just occurred to me, here he is talking about dog crap, and he talks so much dog crap himself anyway.
Absolutely,
but it is the bane
mine
of
is specialist.
I can't
award-winning dog crap.
Yeah. I can't understand how people walk their dogs and just don't clean up after it on the main streets. It's horrendous. But anyway.
Well, it's not today nor yesterday that we've been talking about this for the first time. So it's the bane of many people's lives. Yeah. It's human nature. Let's not try and figure it out. Let's instead work on DIY problems, which we may be able to solve.
It's canine nature is really the issue, but then the problem is the human nature that doesn't look after it.
Exactly. Anyway, Brendan in Kilbeggan is first out of the traps. He says, I spent a lot of money and effort in April to get new beach hedging to the back of the house. The lads who put it in mentioned it might need a drop of water every now and again.
Yeah.
Now I've heard it actually needs a lot of water. So what is the easiest and best way to water the new hedging?
So beach hedging has a very high attrition rate, and it's almost always got to do with water. It needs a lot of water, and it just basically needs a dry week or two to dry out. And once it dries out, it dies. And obviously, if it dies, it doesn't come back to life again. So really with beach hedging, well, it applies to all hedging, but beach hedging in particular, the best thing is to go to your local hardware shop or garden centre and get a roll of, measure it out first, and get a roll of what's known as soaker hose. And soaker hose is, the best of them is just it's a black hose, but it has thousands, millions of little holes in it. So you connect it up to your ordinary hose, you turn on the tap, you put it in line with the beach hedging, and you connect it up to your ordinary hose and you turn on your tap, and it just incrementally, in tiny amounts, just keeps weeping out a small amount of water. So the beauty of the small amount of water is that it goes straight down to the roots. Because the problem is, if you went out with your roller hose, your ordinary garden hose, and a hose gun, and decided to water the Copper Beach or the Green Beach, whichever it is, you'd be standing there and walking slowly up the line with your with your hose and your hose gun, but really the roots will almost never see that water, because water sprayed onto the surface like that, it stays on the surface. It only goes down about an inch. It goes out flat. In other words, it does a big, wide area, but only about an inch. And of course, the roots of the newly sown hedging are down 6 inches or 8 inches down into the soil. So that's the beauty of the soaker hose. It just lets out a small amount of water. It goes straight down. It'll go right down to the roots. And because it's right down low in the ground, it won't evaporate away quickly. So not only are you doing a much better job for the beach hedging, but you're also not wasting water, because you won't have to do this very often, or as often. Like in a dry, scorching fortnight, if we ever get one again, you would be doing it every second night with the hose gun, and it's never going to make it down there. So the beauty of this is it's down 6 inches, 8 inches down, right down into the soil. So that's a long time to dry out. It doesn't evaporate away the way the water does on the surface. Just one thing to remember, and that is, if you're doing this job, you have to put the water in. So if you've 30 metres of hose, water comes in one end, the other end is blanked off, the water flows into the hose and weeps out. But it has to go, the water in, if there's a slope, it has to go top of the slope. Because if you were to put the water in at the bottom of a slope, it won't actually make its way up. It's emptying out as it goes along, you see. So if you had 30 metres going up a slope, you might find the last 10 metres, the hose is empty before it makes it there. So that's really important, that you don't, if you have any slope at all, make sure that your hose pipe, your rolling ordinary garden hose, connects onto the top of the pipe.
This is funny. Liz in Banagher says, we have a garden shed that is leaning slightly to one side.
Okay.
My husband says it gives it character. I say it gives me anxiety. Is there a way to straighten it, or is it a professional job? Doesn't say what it's made from.
Yeah, the big thing is what is it made from. So
if it's concrete, I wouldn't go pushing it.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's either a timber shed or a steel shed. So if it's a steel shed, you'd probably get away with going to the four corners, getting a couple of hardy empty the shed, a couple of hardy bucks, have somebody ready to shove something underneath. So, be it a piece of timber, be it a steel bar, so you'd push up. But if it's a timber shed and if it's been there a while, you do something like that and you could find yourself in trouble. The whole thing could come apart. So that's the route you'd be going if it's a steel shed, and I'd leave well enough alone and admire the character if it's a timber shed. Unless if it's a very new timber shed, you might be okay, but if it's an old one, start pushing timber like that and you could find you're in trouble.
Ben in Athy says, I painted the garden wall last summer and it looked gorgeous for around 10 minutes. Now there are green streaks creeping back up along it after all the rain. Is there anything I can put on it that will keep it clean for longer, or is this just my life now?
No, the whole, after the winter we've had, it has been, I always say to customers when they're in buying moss killer or algae killer or whatever, I'd always say, depending on which side of the counter you are, so if you're your side of the counter, the customer side of the counter, it's been one of the worst years ever for moss or algae. But if you're my side of the counter, it's been one of the best years ever for moss or algae because, of course, we're selling lots of moss killer and lots of algae killer and lichen killer and all of the above. So really, look, any of the moss or algae killers, the ActiWash, the Drive Clear, the Moss Buster, the Moss Go, all of those things sprayed on will do a very, very good job. The ActiWash seems to last longer, but with any of them, you'd be saying spray it on with a garden sprayer if you have one, because that's the most economical way to do it. If not, just put it on with a paintbrush or put it on with a sweeping brush, and don't wash it off. Just leave it there. The longer you leave that there, the better it'll work. It'll remain. It'll have a residual effect. Everybody wants to put it on, leave it a few days, and then power wash. And power washing, obviously can do damage to the paint. It can abrade the surface of any surface, be it stone, timber, whatever it is. It can make it slightly rougher, which makes it more prone to algae. So I would say to you, just put on your biocide, as it's called, and just leave it to work and walk away. All that green will be gone within a couple of days. The next heavy shower rain will wash it off, and yet there'll be a residual amount left of the biocide that will continue to work for quite some time afterwards.
Next up is Siobhan in Portlaoise, who bought one of those fancy hose reels that's meant to make life easier. But she says it's now become a tangled plastic octopus at the side of the house.
Right.
Is there a proper way to wind the hose so it doesn't kink every 5 seconds?
See, it's all got to do with the quality of the hose. But there's two things to say.
That's not the first time you've heard that.
Very good. It sounds like something's been said to you. That hadn't occurred to me. So it's really the first thing is try and empty the hose before you wind it up, particularly if it's one of the collapsible hoses are a little bit of a disaster. So try and just have it in a straight line from the hose reel out, and just keep your hand as you're winding. Put on a glove if you need to, and if you're winding with your right hand, hold the hose in your left hand as you're winding with your right hand, and feed it across over and back, so that it doesn't all end up in one particular area, which will cause a problem. So you just spool. It's like a spool. You're winding back. You're bringing the hose over to the right, back over to the left, back over to the right, back over to the left, and it'll look like you bought the hose reel the previous day. It'll be perfect. Just a little bit of time and patience. Your specialty, Will. Time and patience.
Well, here's one about dog poo that I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with. So whatever about the offender who ignores what the dog has done and leaves it on the path, but the person who picks it up and puts it into a plastic bag, but then leaves the plastic bag on a tree.
It is just...
So the plastic will be there forever. The dog poo eventually will wash away.
Yeah. It's and you know, it's unbelievable. I'm not involved in... I wish I could say, because I'd be so proud to be involved with the Tidy Towns, but I see the pictures that they post of... so you have these dog poo bag dispensers. You know, say along the canal or whatever, you should always be carrying your bag. But if you don't, there's a little dispenser there that will give you a bag. And people use the bag that they get from the butt, and then they put it sitting on top of the dispenser. It's just mind-blowing. But as you say, people, they throw them in places, they hang them on trees. I don't know what the logic is. You know, bring it home and dump it or put it into a bin along your walk. But don't hang it on a tree like this obscene Christmas decoration that's going to be there forever and a day.
Next is Eileen in Moat, who says she has a front wooden door, the bottom of which is looking...
Is that a wooden front door?
This is how she has phrased it. I do not question the lady. But presumably it's interchangeable.
Okay.
Anyway, the problem is on this wooden front door, or front wooden door, is it's looking rather tired and weather beaten. Now, she doesn't want to replace... Yes, indeed. She doesn't want to replace it, and she's seen the price of doors, so she would rather tidy it up if that's possible.
Of course, it's always possible. So she doesn't say what finish it is. So a lot of older doors will be, you know, a hardwood door, people would refer to as a teak door, and they would have been varnished down over the years, and they do get a bit shook looking. And I would be saying, you know, modernise the door by painting it. Nowadays, there are so many paints that are so easy to use. So, like years ago, if somebody came into the shop and they said, I have a teak front door and I want to paint it, and you invariably kind of did the mechanics intake of breath and went, because you had to use aluminium primer, horrible paint to use, one coat, 2 coats of undercoat, and probably 2 coats of a finish to get a really good finish. And it was oil-based, which was slow drying and difficult to work with. And nowadays, they're water-based. They're so easy to use. You don't need a primer. It's 2 coats of the paint you're going to use. It's dry in a couple of hours. You'll get a coat on this morning and a coat on this evening, or a coat on today and a coat on tomorrow. It flows really easily. So the likes of the Super Deck, or one of those all-encompassing 1 coat, 1 primer, no primer needed, is the way to do it. And just always remember, any door, any gate, when you're painting them, you have the 2 sides, front and back. You have the 2 sides on the hinge side and where the lock comes out, and you have the top and the bottom. And the number of times that people don't paint either the top or the bottom, but particularly the bottom. And the problem is, rain hits a door, hits a gate, runs down, and then runs in underneath and soaks up into the untreated timber at the bottom and causes the paint to flake off at the bottom. So if ever you look at any door that's been there for a while that's been painted or varnished, or any gate that's been there for a while that's been painted or varnished, if it's flaking, it will be flaking at the bottom, and that's because the water has gone into the timber, has to get out. Paint doesn't like trying to stick to continually wet timber, and the moisture is trying to get out, so it'll flake off. So always paint the bottom as well, even if it's a case of just putting a piece of newspaper in the ground, and you know, if you can't get a brush in underneath, get a sock and put some paint on a sock and run your hand back and forth, but paint it. It's not going to look well. That doesn't matter. No one's going to see it, but it will make a difference to making the paintwork last longer on any door or any gate.
Brian, don't go anywhere. Lots of questions still to get through. 083 30 10 103. Text and WhatsApp powered by Lamb Brothers Toyota in Tullamore. After 11, are you watching the Eurovision, even though Ireland isn't in it? And good reasons to get on your bike. All on the way in the next hour.
Mr. Fix-It is here to take on your DIY dilemmas. Text or WhatsApp to 083 30 10 103.
Indeed, Brian Cloonan is from Cloonan's Hardware in Tullamore. Pick his brain from now until 11. And the number to call, 0818 300 103. OK, our next query deals with a patio umbrella which has come out of the shed covered in lovely black spots. Now, I'm assuming it's mould and not a design feature. So how can it be cleaned, asks Niamh in Abbeyleix.
Well, honestly, you're probably not going to get rid of the mould. So mould stains are one of the hardest. That black mould stain is one of the hardest things to get out of any fabric, because it's right in it, and if you try and bleach it out, which is really the only way to do it, you'll end up taking colour out of the parasol. So the only hope you might have is if it's a light coloured. So if it's a dark green or a burgundy or whatever, you have no hope. But then it won't show up that much on that. If it's a cream, you might just try mixing some ordinary household Milton and mix it about 4-1, put it in the black spots, give it about 10 minutes, give it a scrub with a nail brush, and then wash it off. But the probability is you're not going to leave it perfect, I'm afraid to tell you. So any fabric like that, be it, the cushions in your garden furniture, whatever it is, anything that goes away and folds up and is stacked or whatever, if it goes away wet, it will get mould. So that's why it's really important with a fabric like that, with a parasol like that. Even if you just open it out in the shed and leave it fully open in the shed, let it dry out, then you can fold it up and put it away. But again, we get people all the time with, as I say, the garden cushions, the cushions off their set of furniture, and they bring it in wet, stack it up in the shed and put it away. Whereas if they were all, hung on a clothesline, leaned up against something that they dry out completely, put in the boiler house, but again not stacked in the boiler house, wherever you can put them to dry out. And once they're dry, you can stack them up and put them away without any problem whatsoever. And the other thing that sometimes happens in a shed, I don't think it's the case in this particular thing, but there are various spiders and indeed flies, but there's a spider in particular, and we get it a lot with, for some reason, boats and mobile homes when they're put away for the winter. So spiders come in, they're sheltering in there, it's not been used over the winter, and the spider crap stains fabric that it'll never come out either. So just be aware that if you put things in a shed like that, sometimes with the likes of the parasol, if you were putting it in there, put a refuge bag down over it to keep any dirt off it, but particularly to keep, if there was spiders in the shed, to keep spider crap off it, because that can stain fabric, and that also is impossible to get out, or very difficult to get out.
Next is Jerry, whose shed, the side is covered in black smoke, the leftover of black smoke. Now, he doesn't say what the shed is made from, but is there any product that's good at removing that dirt that's left behind? Yeah,
so it's from smoke. Really, the only thing that'll do it is sodium hydroxide or caustic soda. So really the handiest thing to use in that is just get one of the an oven cleaner spray. So normally if you're cleaning an oven and the black carbon that's there is very thick and hard to remove, so I'd always say try and use an oven cleaner paste. But in this particular case, because it's a wall, be it timber, metal or a concrete wall, get the spray-on version of the oven cleaner, spray it on, leave it about 20 minutes, then get... now, just be careful, it will burn your hands, but the real thing to avoid is your eyes. You're going to be using a scrubbing brush now to soften everything up. So you've sprayed it on, leave it to soften, give it a scrub and hose it off. But when you're using the scrubbing brush, the one thing you don't want, so you've a nylon scrubbing brush, which will kind of send little particles of the stuff flying around. You don't want that to get into your eyes. So just make sure you wear goggles or glasses or whatever when you're doing it. Give it a scrub and then hose it off, and that will completely break down, because that's carbon, and carbon's a very tough product stain to break down. But the oven cleaner will do it. But just use common sense and be careful with the oven cleaner because it is caustic.
Okay, next we have Marie in Glasson, who has an old cast iron bench in the garden, and she reckons there must be about 100 years worth of paint on this thing, and yet there are still little dots of brown rust here and there. So she wants to jazz it up. She wants to make it look cleaner and nice for the summer, but if she can at all possibly avoid stripping back all of that paint, that would be great.
Right. So it really depends. Look, if it's an old cast iron one, you don't want it to look brand new, really. You know, you're buying an old cast iron one because it looks vintage and it looks antique-y. So I would be saying give it a good power washing. That should take off all the paint that's likely to come off. Now, when you leave that for a few days, sometimes the water will get in under the paint a little bit further, so you might come back at it after a couple of days with a wire brush or a scraper and give it another scrape down, and then you'll get some rust remover or rust neutralizer. And that's just the thing, anywhere there's rust. Now, cast iron will rust, but it's slower to rust than steel. So if you had a steel, gate outside that had bits of it exposed, it would rust in a couple of weeks. The cast iron takes months to rust. So you normally get away with painting it every few years. But if you neutralise the rust, so anywhere that's exposed and rusty, put on a rust neutralizer or a rust remover that just basically turns the rust from rusty red to a black, and now it's neutralised. And then what I would say is put the work in. If it's actually cast iron, that's an expensive bench. It's probably, to buy that, I presume, cost hundreds. It definitely cost hundreds, whether it was close to the 1,000 or whether it was 4, 5, 6, 700 euros. So first treat them with the rust neutralizer, then get a tin of an aerosol, just because it's so handy to use, an aerosol rust primer, and then you can go ahead and paint it with whatever you want. You can be as adventurous as you want. So traditionally, a cast iron bench was always painted black or white. That was it. It was black or white. So if you've bought a traditional cast iron and you want to stay traditional, that's what you do. But you can go, like I've seen people painting them fabulous blue colours and green and so on, and they really stand out then. And you can do that with, again, the likes of the Super Deck we mentioned earlier, or any of those exterior paints. That if you're going to use an oil-based one, use a primer. If you're using one of the water-based ones that doesn't need a primer, well, then you'll just be giving it 2 coats, and it will last for years then, because the fact that you've neutralised the rust and primed it, it will last a long, long time before you need to do it again.
Next is Thomas, who says, my partner and I have moved into a new old house. In other words, new for us, but the house is old.
Okay, I get it.
We've changed the heating system. We don't really need the chimney anymore, but we're not taking it down. Is there a way to close it off neatly? Because some people are saying we need to cement it off, but we really just want to shut it off, if that's possible.
Yeah, so there is indeed. In fact, just when you mentioned that, I looked at a house, a brand new house, lovely house being built recently, and it has 2 nice red brick chimneys on it. And there is no fireplace or stove or anything in the house. They're just there for appearance.
Decorative.
Just purely decorative to make that. Seemingly the guy who got the plans done, and it was done without any chimneys, and he said, no, it just doesn't look right without a chimney on it. So the chimneys are there, and they're like yourself. They're purely decorative. They have they don't do any real work at all. But in this case, what you want is you will go into any hardware shop or builders providers and get a blanking cap. Now, the difference between, so years ago, people would sometimes if they want to blank off the chimney, they'll get some lead and they'd put it down over it, or they'd fill it with concrete. But the problem then is that you can get condensation forming in the chimney. So if you get condensation, moisture forming in the chimney, what happens then is the moisture runs down the wall, and it'll often run down the chimney, and it'll often weep out through the wall. So you're wondering then, in a year's time, you're saying, what's that black mark on my bedroom wall? And it won't wash off, and if I paint over it, the paint just flakes off straight away. That's bitumen. That's where the old chimney with the soot and tar in it, and when the condensation runs down, it weeps out through a join in the lining of the chimney, and it is so hard to deal with. So all the chimney caps, and they're just a flat cap, they're very neat, they go on top of the chimney, but you leave them up a couple of, an inch really, 20 mil, 25 mil, that's all. And what happens is, it comes down the chimney, so by leaving it up a little bit, absolutely no rain can get in, but it's a little bit of air getting in, and it means that the chimney can breathe, and therefore you don't get condensation forming in the future.
Brian, our time is up, I'm afraid to say. So next Wednesday, 10:20, we shall chat again.
Thanks, Will.
David Hollywood is here in the final hour of the programme. And after the news at 11, we hear about various forms of domestic abuse, but never before a case that involves a pet. Details after these.